you for that lovely and powerful number. For a long time, people asked me what Jamestown was like. I had one response, which was, it's adults-only church. And there's a lighthearted aspect to that. I was there 2.5 years, as Pam said, and I heard a baby cry once in sacrament meeting in that time. But there's a more serious side, as Pam mentioned, with respect to the weight of history there, the enormous presence of zeal and accomplishment and of perspective, experience, and it's overwhelming. It's a tide that sort of comes on you when you walk in the doors. I had the privilege of being ordained a high priest when I was 26 years old, and for many years I was the youngest guy in the high priest group. And my first elders quorum at Jamestown, I'm 68 now, I walked in and suddenly I was the youngest guy in elders quorum. But as you've heard from Pam, it's such a wonderful abundance there, and yet there's a sad side to it too. And I think of the 3 lines from Robert Frost. No memory of having starred atones for later disregard, or keeps the end from being hard. I'm going to say that again. No memory of having starred atones for later disregard, or keeps the end from being hard. There's a whole semester, a whole curriculum of discussion we could have about the disregard for those who are older. And similarly, with all the thousands and thousands of ways that the end can be hard. But I want to just focus on one thing, and that's the first line, no memory of having starred. And I want to say 3 things about memory. First, memory leaks. Memory leaks. And you learn this more and more the further on you go. I've got a card here. It's like the card that our priests use. Our sacrament is an ordinance chiefly about memory. You eat the bread, what does it say? In remembrance of his body. You drink the water in remembrance of his blood. And then the plea attached to the bread, one of the pleas is that you may always remember him. And then it's even, the list is even truncated with the water. It's just that they may always remember him. Think of that when you partake of that ordinance. Think about, this is about memory. And remember that memory leaks. Now, the second thing I want to say about memory is that it leaks at different rates for different people, and sometimes different rates within the same person. And one of the beautiful things at Jamestown that is part of the Zion culture of Jamestown is that people have developed the privilege and the duty of remembering for each other. You see it mostly with couples. You probably don't know this song by Mike Smith called The Dutchman. It's about a man who grew up in Rotterdam, and he's losing his memory at a rapid pace, and his wife is not. And the verses tell the story of him. And the chorus is sung in his voice. And this is the chorus. It goes, "Let us go to the banks of the ocean, where the walls rise above the Zuyder Zee. Long ago, I used to be a young man, and dear Margaret remembers that for me." You see this particularly with couples at Jamestown. One is the scaffolding of memory for the other, and it's a beautiful thing. And when one of them dies, if they're the scaffolding, then it's hard for the partner not to collapse because that scaffolding of memory is gone. Now, let me give you, though, one personal example. This is with my mom, who spent her last 8 months at Jamestown, and she'd forgotten pretty much all the things you would think would be important. She'd forgotten all 3 of her husbands. And one time, I was probing this with her, and she said, "It's good to forget some things sometime." And I'll tell you, with at least 2 of those 3, she was right on. But she'd forgotten, having given birth to me, she wasn't sure if I was adopted or not. She'd forgotten all her grandchildren, of course. And one day I was taking her back from a trip. We had taken a drive, as we sometimes did, and we got to the front door of Jamestown, and she grabbed my arm, my forearm, and got very serious and said, "This is a transitional time for me. Someday, I might not remember my own name." And I said, "You won't, but I will." And she said, "Thank you." And that's the third thing I want to say about memory, is that when it leaks out, gratitude often flows in. And if you go to Jamestown, spend time there, you will feel gratitude from everyone, everywhere raining on you. You will be wading in gratitude. You will be awash in gratitude. It is quite stunning, and it's like no other place I've ever been. Let me wind up with a J. Mitten impression. Some of you remember J. Mitten, the late great J. Mitten, father of Julie Staples in our ward, Melanie Mitten, Glagolia, and husband of Joan Mitten, who's also in our ward. He loved the idea of one-sentence sermons. And occasionally, when he'd give a talk, he'd put his left hand in the small of his back, and he'd say, "Here's a one-sentence sermon." And he had a bunch of them. Well, if you want one-sentence sermons, go to Jamestown, because what happens for many people who are there, often because of, as Pam's discussed, the physical disabilities and challenges, which are almost overwhelming. There's a consolidation into a lack of self-consciousness and often overwhelming bluntness and honesty, which can be awkward, but sometimes it emerges in these one-sentence sermons. And I wrote a lot of them down. I'd hear them in prayers. I'd write, "Oh my gosh," that phrase that they just said. Or in testimonies. I'll give you 3 quick examples. One, the sister came in her first testimony meeting. They're passing around the mic. She gets the mic and she says her name, and then she says, "I am a Latter-day Saint. I'm also a Latter-day Sinner." And I thought, boy, that's There we go. That's the perspective we all need. I'm a Latter-day Saint. I'm also a Latter-day sinner. Another woman, in her closing prayer at a sacrament meeting, she was going along sort of the usual phrases, but you have to listen carefully at Jamestown because these phrases will pop out. And she just sort of stopped and said, "Would you do us a favor, Father? Let our mother know that we're doing our best." And then the last one, Sister got up in a testimony meeting, and she's a sister that speaks a lot, and sometimes you think, oh gosh, here we go again. And she stood up and she said, "I was sitting here thinking, what can I tell the people to help make them happy?" And I thought, there's a mission for every teacher. There's a mission for every speaker. There's a mission for every parent. There's a mission for every church leader. I've been sitting here thinking, what can I tell the people to help make them happy? Okay, last thing I want to mention. A big thing that I learned mostly from my mom being at Jamestown, but also in our joint experience there, people love to say, "I'll never forget X, Y, or Z." And for a long time now, really almost 10 years from my mom's experience there, I never say that. And sometimes when people say that, I'll even say to them, "Don't say that," because that's an argument with fate that few people win. And so I go back to the sacrament prayer. Whatever leaks from our memory, the prayer is that we will always remember one thing, one person. Jesus Christ. And I would say two things about him: who he is and how he is. And I leave that with you in his name. Amen.